Good afternoon and welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Each week, I invite an expert from the world of business to share their knowledge, insights and tips to help you with your business challenges. If there's a topic you would like covered, or if you feel you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie and perhaps we'll be having a chat here one day soon. My guest today is the founder of managementeq.com and is a specialist in leadership and sales enablement, working with firms such as Bank of Ireland, Indeed.com, Dell Technologies, and many, many more. He is also a long-time professional speaker and a member of the Professional Speaking Association. I'm delighted to welcome Sean Weafer to the You and Your Business studio. Back again, Sean.
Back again, Alec. I can't seem to get out. Just when I think I've gotten out of it, you drag me back.
A bit. It's a bit like COVID, the virus that keeps kicking. um, we're not going to take you back to the school days. We've done all of that, but I'm particularly interested because you've been around quite a long time, and one of the biggest challenges for anybody in the world of professional speaking would have been coming up to COVID and how you sort of transition through that. You might remind our listeners of the sort of work you were doing and then the changes that you made to help you get through COVID.
Well, the world of professional speaking stretches from doing conference keynoting, sales kickoffs, and even, actual live training in-house. And obviously a lot of that was very much the way things were done prior to COVID arriving. So it was pretty usual for me to travel internationally quite a bit to go and do a sales kickoff maybe, or a management day, or indeed run a series of workshops in any of the areas around leadership or sales enablement that I worked with. And it was almost expected. I mean, the idea of doing something online was perceived as of less value than if you physically showed up in the room. And so nobody was, I also did a lot of leadership coaching as well. And so there was this idea that you had to physically be in the room with someone. So you usually have to spend an hour traveling there, an hour traveling back, you spend an hour with them. Not only was it hugely wasteful for me as a professional, but it was hugely wasteful for what were usually senior executives to leave their offices, take time out, go back in and so on. So obviously when COVID came, in terms of our business, a lot of the companies I work with would have been corporates, and they struggled to get what the model that was going to work for them. How are they going to deal with all these resources, all these people, keep their business viable when all of a sudden we were all locked down, no longer able to connect, no longer able to meet. So it took roughly about 6 months for most companies to sort of come to the ability to be able to resource their people to work remotely, to look after issues like wellness and resilience and all those things, which started to become mental health, which became a huge factor. Yes, of course, yeah. And so the idea of live training and speaking disappeared. So what we as professionals in that space had to do was obviously adapt, and how we adapted was, we moved from being in the room to being on Zoom. Yes, or Teams, or whatever the case may be. And that took a certain amount of changing. So, for example, a half-day workshop that I might have done now became a 2-hour content session, and we followed up a week later for an hour. So there was less time, but it was more constructively used. So in actual fact, people were getting more out of training because it wasn't a 3-hour download. It was just 2 hours highly focused content, which is about the maximum people can manage in terms of attention. Sure. And then you'd have a group coaching session where you'd extrapolate the learning and have them actually apply what they've learned. So actually it worked out as a really, really good model for workshops. The other thing, and then for speaking, speaking sort of became something you might have spent an hour doing, down to 45 minutes, down to sort of 30 minutes, if you will, and became very focused and very, very specific. And in a lot of cases moved away from skill sets to very much this idea of being able to lead remote teams, manage and matrix organizations, being able to get new clients effectively in this new world, right? That we were now all online. So things change quite significantly from that perspective. And so by going on Zoom or on Teams, which became a very strong corporate use for getting in that space, we had to learn to deal with a couple of other elements, not just the way you structured what you did, but one, attention spans diminished.
Yes.
So you had to become very compelling in your messaging and very simple in your messaging to capture and hold people in order to ensure they got value out of the training that you did. You had to change some of the content in the way that previously you had to deliver it. You had more time to deliver. You had more engagement with the audience. Now you were dealing with effectively blank screens. You were dealing with situations everybody turned off their cameras and wandered away. And people were upset about how people weren't rocking up to be there and drool over them as speakers. But the fact of the matter is, you realize you're not here for you. You're here for them. If they don't want to appear on camera, that's their choice. You know, if you're compelling enough, you'll hold them and you engage them. But what it did do for a lot of presenters is I think made people realize that even in this situation here, camera etiquette, it became effectively a TV show.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It became a TV show because really what you focused on was you focused on the camera on your laptop and you presented it on a one-to-one basis, even though you're delivering information on a one-to-many. So that did require a significant change in terms of presentation style.
Yes, of course. And as somebody who would have commanded a stage with large audiences and again, moving and looking in certain directions and engaging with individuals, I suppose that was removed. You had to change that whole way of engagement.
Significantly. I think the other thing that people struggled with and maybe didn't quite grasp was we had moved from a three-dimensional environment where you would see an audience react to maybe some humor or a question or a story and all the techniques we would use as professional speakers to engage audiences and get our messages across to them, to manage their mood or their emotional state, if you will, to a two-dimensional environment.
Right.
And psychologically, because I have a background as an analytical hypnotherapist and as a psychotherapist and as a master of NLP as well, the other big change was this two-dimensional environment. Our brains were trying to work out how to build trust with what had become effectively pixels on a screen, as opposed to a real, live, living, breathing individual, where all our some of our senses were shut off in terms of learning to make threat assessments and build trust, et cetera, et cetera. And that was a big shift too, moving from a three-dimensional to a two-dimensional environment and not getting anywhere near the same kind of engagement, involvement, response, or reaction to an audience that for a lot of speakers or indeed trainers fuels them. I mean, yes, if you know yourself, Alec, you've done it yourself often enough that if you've got an audience that's responsive, they're laughing at your humor, they're engaging with your questions, you can see their engagement, you get an energy from them, which helps you deliver even more or even better than if you're struggling to get an audience and sort of who are highly reflective and you have to keep pumping information out to them. So the other challenge then was to ensure that even though you were now doing this TV broadcast situation, that it wasn't just a monologue. It wasn't just you talking at them. You had to find ways to make it a dialogue so that their attention was engaged and at least they were thinking about the point you were talking about. So you had to become much more adept at framing metaphors and questions and stories and allegories in order to get a message effectively and bring people on board with you.
And if you're just joining us now, you're listening to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my guest today is Sean Weafer. And Sean, being a professional speaker and sort of well versed with handling live audiences, just talking about the transition that was needed to be made to engage, as he said, a two-dimensional audience now. Were there any tips and tricks that you spotted that made things even better for people?
I think for me, I mean, if you had asked me 5 or 6 years ago to deliver to a camera, I would have literally frozen. I could have spoken to thousands of people, wouldn't have bothered me at all because you had that reaction. But speaking to a camera, it's different because it's just a blank sort of little dot that you have to focus on and engage with and build a relationship with. Thankfully, I did an excellent TV production and presentation course in the Milltown Institute in Dublin some years ago. Which helped me overcome that. And I found that proved to be very, very helpful in terms of learning to engage with the camera. So things like proper eye contact, smiling, the clothes you wore, where you, like there's a tendency in a Zoom meeting or a team meeting to look down and look at the person.
Yes, of course.
The problem is if you look down and look at the person, you're now looking down, so you actually don't have eye contact.
Yes.
Whereas if they look at you on the screen and you're looking at the camera, they have good eye contact, and eye contact is critical in building rapport. Now, not eye contact to the extent that you stare directly into the other person's eyes and look like a homicidal maniac, right? But making good eye contact is one of the ways in which we build rapport, we build trust. So having done that training several years ago was definitely very, very, very helpful to me. And I'd recommend anybody, because, during the during the period of time during the pandemic, I got a chance to re-release all my books and update them
Right.
and all that. And so the latest book was The Highly Trusted Advisor: How to Lead Teams and Win Clients in the Hybrid Age. The hybrid age is the one in which we live in now.
Right.
Moving forward from here, we're going to be able to manage and have to manage remote teams, people who will engage with us on Zoom or on Teams. And then occasionally we'll be in the office. So we need to be able to function in both of those environments. So I guess as a professional speaker, as a coach, as trainer, as you say, leadership and sales enablement, predominantly, COVID educated not just me, but indeed all of us to be able to function on multiple platforms and still get what is the important thing, the message or the education or the development of the other person out through those particular media.
One of the things that I suppose COVID from a positive side gave us was the ability to step off the sort of treadmill of life and reevaluate what we were doing. I know you did that yourself because, again, you have a lot of content there and books written in the past, but also you had other projects that invoking the feminine. If I have it right this time. And maybe you might talk to our listeners just a bit about that, how you took some time out just to reevaluate and put together that content for these new audiences.
Well, I think, I mean, I mentioned earlier that it took 6 months for my clients anyway to sort of get to grips with the change that had been thrust upon us all in terms of moving from live and teams and offices to where everything had become remote. So I had 6 months to sort of reevaluate, as I'm sure many of us did, what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, what was working, what needed to change in my business. And part of that was, as you said, updating and re-releasing and the books that I have. So, I mean, I have, as I mentioned earlier, the Highly Trusted Advisor book about how we lead and win clients in the hybrid age. I have one. I had a book many, many years ago, back in 2001, called The Business Coaching Revolution. Coaching was first coming out, all about coaching. So I updated that and we called it Cash. Coaching is a side hustle. So
nice one.
So it's all about coaching. It's what you need to do if you want to think about coaching as a professional, and using it as a side hustle to build into it and so on. And then the last book that came out of it is, as you said, Invoking the Feminine: Strength, Love, and Wisdom, which is really a little metaphor for about a father and his daughter. Her mother dies and she's trying to deal with the grief. And the father introduces her to feminine spirituality. So,
right.
The goddess and the three aspects of the goddess. But he talks to her and then she meets these different characters and they share like three competencies in each of the three paths to help her cope with grief and become a fully rounded person. But it's a metaphor. It's a simple, very simple little story, but it's also about how we need to find more balance in who we are, both as leaders, where we need to embrace more feminine-based approaches in the modern world. So values like empathy, compassion, synergy, network, consideration, collaboration, community, these will be predominantly feminine values, as opposed to the traditional masculine values of competition, individualism, presenteeism, a lot of what come across as very negative aspects in corporate culture. Yes. But in actual fact, also have a positive benefit. Like, there are times when you need to command and control. There are times when you need to lead from the front. There are times when you need to motivate your people. There are times when you need to be a shield over them to protect them from a higher result. But it's really about how we, both in our personal selves and in our capacities as leaders or indeed sales professionals, need to bring both feminine and masculine energies together to reach a balance so we can operate from either area in order to be the best that we can be in whatever we do. So it was interesting to explore that aspect and bring more of that into my leadership and into my sales work.
It's quite interesting because, certainly there's a huge push these days for more women in business, more women to take leadership roles. But it seems to be pushed out more as a competition to the male rather than being complementary to the total environment.
Yeah, I think we've a fundamental challenge. I mean, the book, the Invoking the Feminine book, starts with some research that was done, I think it was, if I recall right, Stanford University, which indicated that if you wanted teams, exclusively male teams, to make better decisions, what you needed to do was to add more women. The reason being that most men, when we make decisions, tend to do it in a hierarchical way. So we'll have an alpha male or the head guy, you'll have people who support him, and people tend to go along with that. And anybody seen to push back at that or whatever is seen as a rebel or a troublemaker or whatever the case may be. So you tend to get a lot of sameness. What the research did was when you brought women into the group, provided they acted in typical feminine behavior, which is to discuss, to network, to synergize, to collaborate. Right. That's what created what was known as the social intelligence of the group. And as a result, better decisions were made. I think the challenge with women moving into leadership roles is that while they're very good in many cases, many of them tend to feel that they have to take on masculine traits in order to do the job, which means they're really only leading the same way men have been leading up to now, which isolates a lot of them from the rest of the women who should naturally be their partners and supporters in a business. And it's almost that they're afraid to bring this powerful feminine aspect of themselves, which as women is natural to them, which are the things such as networking, collaboration, support, compassion, empathy. And these are the values of the post-COVID age: empathy, trust, influence, making an impact. And that's what more women as leaders in society, hopefully that was the plan, I would imagine. That was a hope that they would bring those elements to leadership. But, because of social conditioning, because of expectations and so on, many of them tended to embrace the masculine energies. But I think that's changing. I mean, the reason I wrote the book was not just about women, it's about men and women. Yes, like men have feminine energies too. We just have to embrace them and recognize them and apply them and balance them up. So it's about individuals, regardless of gender. Being masculine or feminine, we're talking about energies and traits. We're not talking about, male or female.
Yes.
It's immaterial. It's about, can we bring that yin and yang balance together to become more than the sum of the individual parts?
Yeah, and we'd hope so, because, when they work in harmony, you have the greatest strength.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, again, the whole area of leadership, I know you have a passion around that and are talking more and more about it. Would you like to share with our listeners just some of the thoughts you have around about leadership at the moment?
Well, I suppose one of the things that people ask me, like, you do leadership and you do sales enablement. Surely they're two completely different things. And I say, well, actually, they're not, because they're both founded on two fundamental principles. One is the ability to communicate effectively, and the other is service. So if you look at a sales professional, their job fundamentally is to be of service to external stakeholders, to solve their problems with their product or service, and then monetizing the engagement to bring revenue into the business.
Right.
For leaders, their job is to be of service to their internal customers, their staff, their teams, their colleagues, who then execute what needs to happen to deliver for the client at the end of the day. So they're both based on effective ability to influence, to build trust, to be able to make an impact. These sort of things are critical on both levels. So communications and the ability to build connections are critical in that space. So for me, if I talk about modern leadership, it's very much about service.
Right.
It's not about that I even think about a lot of our leadership titles are no longer relevant. Like, to be called a director.
Right.
Like, what do you direct? Are you directing machines, directing traffic? What do you direct, right? Surely your job should be more of a facilitator, a synergizer, a motivator, a coach, an integrator. We need to look sometimes even at the language we use around leadership today in order to get ourselves to the next generation leadership that's required in the post-COVID age. And that next generation leadership is not about expertise, although that's important, because in the past, our expertise lent us the authority. We became senior people because of our expertise. Now, expertise is not what's important. What's important is, can you influence the people around you to accomplish the objectives? And actually, if time permits, there's a very good story about Henry Ford.
Yes.
As an example of that, like 100 plus years ago, where apparently Ford was being sued for, somebody mentioned something in a newspaper about Ford not being a particularly intelligent guy or whatever it was, right? And Ford obviously sued the newspaper, right? And then when he was being challenged in court, he was in the witness stand, and the lawyer for the newspaper was saying, He said, Mr. Ford, can I ask you a couple of very simple questions? And he asked him some really, really simple questions like, what's the American president on the $5 bill? And Ford said, I have no idea, right? He said, what is E pluribus unum, which is on the American thing, from the many one mean? He says, I have no idea, right? And he asked a couple of other questions, none of which Ford can answer.
Yes.
And then the lawyer said, Judge, I put it to you, these are the questions any fifth grade high school student will be able to answer. And this man can't answer it. Surely this proves our case. And the judge says, Mr. Ford, have you anything to say? And he says, I do, Judge. He said, I run a multi-million-dollar car company. On my desk, I have a black box. And on the black box, I have a button. And I only have to press a button to have any number of PhDs in my employ answer any question I want answered. Why do I need to fill my head with nonsense? And the example of that, what Ford was really saying was, I don't need the information. I need the influence and the ability to get people who have that information to give what I need when I need it, to make the decisions I need to make to be successful at what I do. And that is as true today as it was over 100 years ago. In fact, it's even more true today, where we live in a world that is the information age. Clients of Google, staff members of Google, we can get access to information quickly. What we cannot do is synergize that information and use it in a way that's effective to accomplish our objectives. That's what leadership is about today. And in fact, I'd say that's the same thing with salespeople are for. Back in the day when I started in sales 5,000 years ago, they talked about, we used to be what they call back of the brochure guys. You read the back of the brochure about the IT system before you went in to tell someone with even less knowledge than you had, and then you'd make a sale on the basis of it, right? By blinding them with science. But that's not the case anymore. I mean, clients have access to Google. They have information. They know what their stuff's going on. So the job of a modern salesperson, much as it is for a leader, for internal people, is to interpret the information a client has and deliver a solution on the back of that. So it's all about interpretation, synergizing, and service.
And if you're just joining us now, you're listening to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my studio guest today is Sean Weafer. We're just talking about a transition in attitude towards sales and how sales works, when in fact it's always worked the way it should be working now. As you said, people have Google, so they do all the homework. They don't want the hard sell.
Correct. It's very simple. I mean, when I work with sales teams, I say, look, the word selling itself comes from the word to be of service. So selling is not a hard thing. All you got to do is find people who've got a problem that you have a solution for. You build a relationship with them. You interpret what you do in a way that solves their problems. And if it's compelling enough for them and delivered in a compelling enough way, they agree to do business with you and exchange money for the benefit of that. It's not rocket science. But selling, like leadership, and this has been the big shift, which I still don't see in many companies, is not about logic. It's about expertise. It's about emotion. Cranfield University said that 90% of our business decision making is emotionally driven, not logically driven. And still leaders and still sales teams lead with logic instead of emotion. And that's the single biggest change that now needs to happen in the hybrid age. People talk about the attention span of the audience is getting shorter and shorter. Somebody, I think they said, had done a research which said that our attention span was now 8.5 seconds for anything, right? I mean, that's less than the actual attention span of a goldfish, right? That's not true. I sat through 2.5 hours of Top Gun recently with my eldest son. Trust me, if I could sit through 2.5 hours of Tom Cruise
and all of that,
if I'm interested, it's not my attention span. Here's the challenge. It's not the attention span. It's the level of distraction.
Right.
It's the level of intensity we now work at. And if you can't break through that level of distraction, if you can't break through that level of intensity, if you can't deliver a compelling, relevant, valuable message, whether it's to your team or to your potential clients, you're going to suffer going forward.
Yeah, no, you certainly will. I suppose in the last 2.5 minutes we've got left, let's talk about the Global Speaking Summit coming to Dublin for the first time, and maybe tell our audience a bit about that. And you're the opening keynote speaker on that, no less.
I am indeed. And I was the closing keynote speaker in Vancouver in 2013. So they clearly didn't see through my tricks and Machiavellian techniques to now become the opening. In fact, I think I'm the only person who is ever going to open and has also closed it. But the Global Speaker Summit is a summit that happens every 2 years for professional speakers from all over the world. So we're going to be welcoming people from America and Canada, obviously the UK as well. We're going to have people from mainland Europe. We're going to have people as far as Singapore. And it's been held in Crow Park over 4 days. So it'll involve a number of main stage keynote speakers. I'll be opening the keynote, which is quite an honor. I'm very, very delighted to be chosen to do that. And the closing keynote speaker I've just heard is a gentleman called Tim Gard, who's an American humor speaker who's extremely good. But yeah, I mean, it's a bit like a busman's holiday because, I mean, you're going to be talking to 200, 300, 400 professional speakers from around the world, all of whom are sitting in the audience saying, why wasn't I picked for this gig? I'm better than that, right? So you really, really have to bring your best game to these guys. So it's a great honor. It's also a huge challenge. But there'll be all kinds of workshops and networking and entertainment that'll happen over those 4 days. It'll be held in Crow Park this year. So 100 years of independence, 1922 to 2022. Ireland gets up on the world stage again. I think it's going to be a great event.
No, it certainly will. And for our audience out there, thepsa.co.uk for more information about that. I suppose one of the challenges of standing back on stage these days is if you see people on their phones, you will tell yourself they're on social media and not disengaged.
I think it's a very good point. I do think it's a very good point. I think you have to accept people don't write stuff anymore. They type it into laptops. People might very well be tweeting what you're doing. And you know what? Also the issue with interest, some people will, everybody does it. I do it myself sitting in an audience. You flow in and you flow out. Okay. And all you've got to do is deliver the best value when they're there.
Right. I suppose as we close off, maybe you might tell people where they can find out more about you and more importantly, where they can buy all of these great books you have.
Well, you can get all the books on Amazon.com. I guess if you just look up Sean Weafer, you'll see the books that are there. And if you want to just check out some of my videos, you'll see them on YouTube as well. You will see some of those, the keynote in Vancouver, Rebel in a Business Suit, Sheep, Wolves and Dragons, various other keynotes and tips and networking, presenting, what have you. And then just go to my own website, SeanWeafer.com, to pick up the different things that I do there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Sean, for coming into the You and Your Business studio. Thanks to Sam on Sound. The podcast of today's show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow. Thank you for your company, and please remember to join me, Alec Drew, again next week at the same time, right here on 103.2 Dublin City FM for another edition of You and Your Business.